Hi, I'm Helen. I'm part of the Artscape team, and for this video I've chosen to talk to you about Raphael's Transfiguration. It feels really important to talk about Raphael right now. Good Friday sees the 500th anniversary of his death, and the enormous exhibition to celebrate his career that had been organised in Rome has had to close, like so many exhibitions and galleries right now. And so I wanted to bring some Raphael to you at home. But of all the paintings I could have chosen to talk to you by Raphael, the Transfiguration also feels really relevant right now because of its message of healing. And so I hope you enjoy the work of this high Renaissance master. The Transfiguration in all its glory. We have two narratives from the New Testament here. In the top half, you have the actual Transfiguration. And this is when Jesus took three disciples, Peter, James, and John, up Mount Tabor. And at the top, he transfigured. He levitated and emitted such bright light that he looked like he was dressed all in white. And it was so powerful, this light, that the disciples were thrown to the ground. And then Moses and Elijah came down from heaven to talk to Jesus. And one of the things I really like about the top half and how Raphael's painted this is that you can recognize Peter. He's in the middle of the disciples on the mountain. He's the one wearing blue and yellow. And he's the only one of the disciples looking up, or at least trying to look up. When you see the painting in the flesh, you'll be able to see that the eyelids are actually closed. And so he isn't able to witness this, but he is trying. Now, one of the things, if you read the book of Mark, you'll know that during this enormously amazing miracle, the disciples were terrified. And of all of them, Peter is the one that tries to speak and says, "Oh my gosh, this is an amazing thing. Moses and Elijah here. Should I make shelters for all of you?" And the narrator's voice in the book of Mark says it was a really silly thing for him to say because they didn't need shelters, but he was so scared. And Jesus' reply is saying, no, we don't need shelters. But one of the things that's really important about this and the way Raphael has painted Peter is that Peter's primacy amongst all of the disciples is shown, and why he's so important as the first pope, which is really relevant given the patron, and I will talk to you about who paid for this work in a bit. But moving down to the bottom half of the painting and the second part of the narrative, we have a scene from the bottom of the mountain where, to the left, you can see the remainder disciples, the disciples left, who have been approached by family, and you can see them on the right. You've got a mother on her knees and a father in green, and they're presenting their boy, whose arms are spread really wide. And he is, as they explain to the disciples, he has been possessed by a demon. And the demon throws him into these seizures that are incredibly dangerous. And they tell him that one of these seizures threw him into a fire. And they're asking the disciples to heal their son. And if you look at the disciples' gestures and poses, you can see that this has thrown them into such a state of confusion. We've got one guy holding a book saying, "Wait," it's almost as if he's saying, wait, I'm just trying to look up how to do that. Another guy in red pointing to the top of the mountain saying, "Oh, you'll have to wait. Jesus is the only person who can do that, and he's not here." The other disciples are putting their hands out as if saying, "No, no, no." Another one, his hands to his chest as if saying, "I'm really sorry, I don't know what to do." Now, what will happen in the story, which isn't shown here, is that Jesus will come down from the mountain and he will heal the boy. But then he will really tell the disciples off and say, "You could have done this yourselves if you had enough faith. You are going to be so lost when I die and when I'm not here anymore. You've got to sort yourselves out. And it's a quite glorious story of Jesus ticking off his disciples. Now, to the man who paid for this and why it's relevant to him, the man was Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, and a lot of you will recognise that surname. He was cousin with the current Pope, Leo X, and in fact he is going to become Pope himself. He will become Pope Clement VII, but when he commissions this painting, he is just a cardinal, and he is Archbishop to a town in the south of France called Narbonne. This is the cathedral at Narbonne. Now, Cardinal Giulio wants to commission lots of art for this cathedral, and he doesn't just commission Raphael, he also asks Sebastiano da Piombo to paint the raising of Lazarus for this cathedral. And this is really significant with the story of Raphael's Transfiguration, because immediately by commissioning two artists working in Rome, the Cardinal is putting them in competition. Two enormous paintings showing the miracles of Jesus that are both going to be at the high altar, and Raphael and Sebastiano have to up their game knowing that their work will be shown next to someone else's. So immediately, Sebastiano writes to his old friend Michelangelo and says to Michelangelo, "You've got to help me. You've got to make my painting look better than Raphael's." And famously, Michelangelo detested Raphael, and the two of them were recorded of having quite a few arguments. And Michelangelo leaped at the chance to help Sebastiano and immediately replied with drawings to help with the composition. And so this is the drawing that Michelangelo gave to Sebastiano for Lazarus. And it's really significant because if you look really closely at the figure of Lazarus, and also back to the figure of Jesus in pink with his arm stretched pointing to Lazarus, and the words that Jesus says at this point are, "Lazarus, come forth." And he's bringing Lazarus back to life in this life-giving gesture. And the pose of Lazarus is they're just taking these shrouds off and looking at Jesus because he's just been brought back to life. It's really similar to something that you might all recognise. The pose of Lazarus is actually, if you flip it and turn it and pivot it slightly and just change the right arm, it's exactly the same as the pose of Adam, who has just been brought to life in a life-giving gesture point by God in Michelangelo's creation. And so immediately Michelangelo is giving Sebastiano this really clever composition, this really clever pose that's going to make his painting really exciting for everyone that looks at it. Meanwhile, Raphael finds out that he's been put up against Sebastiano and therefore Michelangelo, and immediately has to up his game. And so that's when he decides that he's going to have the second story in his work of the boy, the healing of the boy. He had originally just intended it to be the Transfiguration, and he decides that he needs to make the narrative more exciting. He also possibly chooses the healing of the boy because the story is relevant to the patron. If you remember, he's called Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, and the Medici family often make links to medicine in the art they commission because their surname sounds very similar to the word medico. It's the Italian for medic, and therefore any link with medicine is going to be a really clever pun on the family name. And so Raphael here is making his work a little bit more relevant to the patron, knowing that, of course, the raising of Lazarus by Sebastiano will be doing exactly the same thing, both paintings of healing. So, Just incidentally, if we look at the Transfiguration up close, you can see on the left these two little figures, and I haven't explained who they are yet. No one's 100% sure exactly who they are, but my favourite theory is by the art historian Nicholas Penny, who suggests that they are Saint Justus and Pastor. And he says it's probably them because their relics are actually in the cathedral in Narbonne. And so they would be relevant to this place. But whilst we're looking at the top half of the painting, I also want to talk about the work stylistically, because it's very, very different in the top half to the bottom half. In the top half, we have this really symmetrical composition. It's very geometric with a really harmonious palette. And that is very typical of the High Renaissance, which Raphael is so celebrated for. And you see this geometry and symmetry in his really early religious works and in his very, very famous School of Athens here. The symmetry is almost kind of bonkers with the linear perspective and the architecture. But also the groupings of the figures are very harmonious, the palette is very harmonious, and it's altogether very, very typical of the High Renaissance. But when we look at the bottom half of the work, we see an altogether different type of painting. It's got a different light. The light is really dramatic. The tonal transitions between the light and the dark are very, very quick. It's moving into a sort of tenebrism that is quite new for this period in art. And it's really dramatic with these gestures and expressions, which is new to Raphael. Although not entirely new, because one or two of Raphael's late works had started to show this really dynamic and dramatic style. So this is his Expulsion of Heliodorus, which is in the room next door to the School of Athens in Pope Julius II's papal apartments. And on the right you can see Heliodorus about to be attacked by a group of angels. And the light again is really, really dramatic, as well as the poses of these angels. And it suggests that Raphael, in the later sort of years of his life, had this new emerging style that was just starting to appear in his works. He died very soon after he finished this work, at the age of 37, and if he'd lived longer, I'm sure there would have been a really exciting new style that he would have pioneered. Now, one of the things that Raphael does in his paintings quite often is he puts in quotes. It's not copying and it's not plagiarizing, it's simply providing erudite patrons with really fun little quotes that they can be really excited by. And the quote that I wanted to first show you was in the pose of the woman, the mother of the boy. Now she's kneeling, wearing pink and blue and twisting around her. Now this pose is called Figura Serpentinata, and it's becoming really popular in the 16th century. And Raphael's actually crazy, bonkers, devoted to this pose. He puts a kneeling, twisting woman in so many of his works. There's one in the Entombment, there's one in the Expulsion, there's one in the Sistine Madonna. She appears in many, many works. It's a really complicated pose to paint. And she really quotes specifically Michelangelo's Doni Tondo. And so obviously, I mean, down to the colours of her clothes, a kneeling woman twisting around her, reaching for her son. And although Raphael and Michelangelo weren't friends, and Raphael is certainly not doing this because he wants to honour Michelangelo, Michelangelo's poses are so famous. He's finished the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which is full of seated and kneeling figures twisting around. And so Raphael is simply making his work more exciting by quoting Michelangelo. He's not doing it necessarily to suggest any favour to Michelangelo. But it's not just Michelangelo that he's quoting here. He's actually also quoting another of the High Renaissance masters, and that is Leonardo da Vinci, and specifically his Adoration of the Magi, which is also in the Uffizi with Michelangelo's Doni Tondo. And the specific reference here is in the face of one of Raphael's disciples, which you can see from Leonardo. There's a really similar expression with the mouth and the nose and the furrowed brow. And Raphael is simply celebrating these high Renaissance masters in his work and providing the patron with lots and lots of quotes that they would have loved. So, as I said, Raphael died soon after this work was finished, and it therefore never went to Narbonne. It was never delivered to the intended location. It was instead actually used as part of the funeral procession for Raphael and exhibited at the end of where his coffin was. And his procession ended in the Pantheon where he's buried today. So a really important work to celebrate Raphael and his entire career. So the next time you're in Rome, which hopefully won't be too long away, I hope you make the pilgrimage to the Vatican to see this painting in the flesh. It's utterly glorious, and I think you'll all be surprised by how large it really is. And I hope you've enjoyed this film. Thank you.